your host, Alex Garrett.
All right, and I'm here with another special guest from Podmatch.com. This time it's Jennifer Gasner. And Jennifer, actually, we approached each other on Podmatch, and I said, man, this is a perfect fit because you are out there working to change the perception of people with disabilities. And so I wanted to have you on for the One Leg Up on Adapting podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it seems like based on your bio and everything that you were living a great life. And I didn't say normal life because people with disabilities should be normalized, right, in society. But
Yes.
you then were diagnosed with this rare neuromuscular disease called Friedrich's ataxia. And you did not let that stop you. Tell us your journey here, Jennifer.
Oh, I was having trouble with my handwriting, seemed to be getting a little more difficult, and I was having trouble walking in a straight line. I had always been very accident prone, and I had a lot of accidents, broken glasses, falling off my bike, breaking my arm, and finally one day I was 16 and I was walking to my mom's car. She was picking me up and I almost fell. And that was basically the last straw when I was like, something's not right here. This doesn't feel right. And that's really how the journey began.
In your journey to try and figure all of this out, did you find doctors were dismissing you, or did you find you actually found a great care team along the way that was able to help you get to this diagnosis and through the diagnosis, if you will?
My first neurologist was very flippant and kind of a jerk. He was like, well, this whole thing is no big deal. Don't worry about it. And then a year later, my parents took me to get a second opinion, and that doctor was great. He was very helpful. But yeah, the first one was a disaster.
But you've kind of shined a bright light on how, people with disabilities are not someone to be in the dark or to be left aside or pushed aside. You say that the media is portraying the disabled community in such a way that needs to be changed. That's why you've taken this on. That's why you wrote your memoir, My Unexpected Life. So what were you seeing in the media that really bothered you to no end?
Well, the big thing, and this was more something I figured out 10 years after I was diagnosed, really, but the big thing is, like, my Friedrich's ataxia is a form of muscular dystrophy. So that's kind of the easy way to describe it. And when I heard muscular dystrophy, I was like, wait a second. Not who I have seen in the Liberty Telethon. Granted, this was 1990, so things were a lot different back then. But because I had seen that image, and the first time I saw somebody who had the same disability, he was a wheelchair user, and that really freaked me out in 1990 at 17, because again, the way it was portrayed made it feel like my life was over.
Jennifer, it's clearly not over. In fact, you're on Instagram, and I want to promote you there as well, at Jenny G. Let me get it right before I screw it up here. Jenny G. Writer is your Instagram, and you're really doing all these different panels. I mean, what's it like to be invited as a guest speaker? And then do you find that when you talk to these different panels and on these different panels, wow, someone's really been impacted? Like, I feel like when they hear from you, they walk out of that panel, or they come out of that panel a little different than they were when they walked in, right?
I hope so. Well, the greatest compliment I got was from a woman. I'm not sure how old she was, but she said she had invisible disabilities. And reading my book was the first time she felt seen and heard and understood. And I was like, well, that's exactly part of the reason why I wrote this.
Jennifer, how have you adapted since this diagnosis? Like, what kind of accommodations have been made, or have you been really fighting for, whether it be going to college? I mean, you got your MS and your BA, BA, you got your master's, you got your undergrad. Any accommodations through those years that you were fighting for and were able to get to be able to succeed at that level?
Well, I didn't have to do much fighting in college and grad school in terms of getting note takers or accommodations for my exams. But I did run into a scenario in grad school where they had the exam room for all the students with disabilities were basically in the lobby of the office. So there would be lots of commotion going on while we were taking the exam, which I didn't think was correct. So luckily, my teachers let me take my exams in a different location. But those weren't that big, which I was a little surprised by, that people actually believed me when I said I needed this or that, because when I started college, I didn't use any assistive devices. I did when I went to grad school, but still, it did surprise me. So I've gone through kind of layers of accommodations because this is a progressive disability. So I tried to use a cane for a little while. That didn't work. Then I went to the walker, and at 26, I started using a wheelchair. And I've had to modify bathrooms and put ramps in my house. I've had to get an accessible van and learn how to drive using my hands, things like that.
Jennifer, you're telling your story now, and I want to get to that adaptability at home in a minute because my fiance is actually in a power chair, and a lot of her house has been fitted for that accessibility as well.
Mm.
And then you venture outside, and it's like, well, the world's not always accessible outside your own home. So how do you deal with that? You leave your home, which is adapted, and then you might find a place that isn't adapted or accessible. And to this day, does that still, piss you off, if you will? How do you deal with those kinds of things?
Well, I'm fairly lucky, very lucky, because I live in California. So the majority of the construction is new. So I don't have to worry too much about a building not being accessible or things like that. Not to say that there aren't places in San Diego that.
We know it's funny. I see that LA actually built a train recently in the recent years. Do you ever try those trains in LA? And how is the transportation? Is it accessible?
Yes. Actually, I find using the subway system in LA pretty easy for the most part.
Well, that's great because here in the city, our subway system can use some revamping sometimes, especially with the platforms. But, that's a story for another day in a sense. I see that you were part of the Abilities Expo. Now, in our parts of the world, we have it in New York, we have it in New Jersey, and we participate in that every May. What was that like for you in March to be part of the Abilities Expo?
That was really interesting because I've gone to the Abilities Expo before as a patron. This is the first time I went as an exhibitor. So it was just a really interesting experience. And a friend of mine was there and she made a comment because she had never been to an Abilities Expo, and she was a little disappointed because, again, it's another situation where it's like all these non-disabled people are providing services to the disabled people, and there really wasn't a lot of representation where it was people with disabilities representing an organization and hopefully providing some service and ways to support the community, which is what we were doing, because I went as part of Diversability.
Yeah, I see Diversability actually has a podcast. That's pretty awesome as well. Are you on that a lot? Are you a host on there, or what is your role with them?
No, I was just on it the one time.
Well, tell me about the crossover, like the breaking through to the able-bodied community. I feel like you wrote this to not only break through to the disabled community, but also the able-bodied, right? You wanted the able-bodied community to have more of insights into your world and your journey, right?
Yes. And I say this in the book. I was I still am, but in in the beginning of the journey, I was very ableist. I had I had the mindset of pity and needing the cure and different things like that. Um, but when I discovered uh, disability culture and the independent living movement, that totally changed my ideas and gave me a huge shift in perspective and really allowed me to embrace my identity.
Well, let's talk about that because you're telling your story now, but you're a 17-year-old um going through this, going through all the symptoms and the signs, if you will, as an able-bodied girl at 17, able-bodied teenager. So tell me, did you not want to tell your friends and family, hey, this is what I'm going through? Were you reluctant to share the story then? And when did that reluctancy start to change? When were you like, okay, I'm going to talk about this?
Gosh, that's a good question. I know my parents made it clear to me about a year after I was diagnosed that they really didn't want to talk about it. So that kind of left me feeling very alone. And I talked to my friends, but there wasn't really a feeling that they understood or they got what I was going through. So I really
Did you
did,
feel alone actually in this journey?
yes,
You did.
yes. In the beginning, I certainly did. Uh, and that was also part of the beauty of finding disability culture because it allowed me to open myself up a little more.
Well, and I'm just thinking about this because at 17, personally, I was going from high school to college. And of course, I was in a school with kids with disabilities my whole life, from kindergarten to 12th grade. So it was a bit of a culture shock going into college and
Yeah.
at 17 and seeing like, oh my God, look at it's a different atmosphere, right? So for you, you were dealing with I hate to say becoming disabled, but going through becoming disabled at 17. And then
Yes.
that's right as you're graduating high school into college. That had to even add even more stress to your world. How did you get through that?
Yes. Yes. Well, I was in a huge state of denial for a long time. And I used alcohol a lot the first couple of years. Maybe 1 year is more accurate. But then I went to a support group for adults with muscular dystrophy, and they were all very bitter and very, complaining about, oh, I'm going through this and this and this. And it was not supportive by any means. And that was really when I decided, I don't want to end up like that. Um, so I at that point, that's really when I changed my mind and decided, no, I'm not gonna let this take over and consume my life, like it had been doing. I
Well,
really,
it sounds like you were able to push through. Now, I've I have to say you mentioned the word ableist. So, um, I feel like we all have different, I guess, interpretations of that. So, what was your interpretation of that? And do you feel like we're still in such an ableist culture that there's got to be more change to that narrative, or however you want to say?
yeah, I think it's basically devaluing the uh, person with a disability and basically assuming they can't do anything, that, you know, because that means they're weak, things like that. And they're not can't be live a fulfilling life if they have a disability. I think that's part of it. And that's, yes, I mean, we still have a long way to go, but I feel like I am so impressed now. Like, how many podcasts like yours are related to disability, and there are more books, and there's more conscious attitude about inclusivity.
And of course, that's a great point because we're just in the Paralympics, and I feel like a select group of folks like we are in tune with the Paralympics, but we're trying to spread that message out, right?
Yes.
So,
In fact,
how besides sharing the story and everything, how would you recommend us to make it more inclusive? Like, not just us being included, but actually including those who aren't disabled into our world. I think sharing the Paralympics is a great way to do it.
yes, I agree. In fact, you know, I started watching the opening ceremony yesterday. And I have to say, like, I was really impressed by their discussions about disability and you know, the things, the attitudes that many people have about disability. I think it's one of the first times I've heard it being spoken about in such a what's like large venue and with a huge audience.
Well, whether you're a writer or an athlete, there's no doubt that we're all out here to work hard and not just participate. I think we got to get rid of that word participation. My friend Steve
Yeah.
Serio, captain of the USA men's wheelchair basketball team, said, "We're not participants, we're competition." And by the way,
Yeah.
you are competitive also because I'm looking here and Jen Gasner, I see that you were nominated as part of the National Indie Excellence Awards. You were named a finalist in the memoir category in the NIEA. I mean, that's a huge deal. And by the way,
Yeah.
it's not in your bio, so you're very modest, but I got to shout you out with this.
Yes. Well, I guess I need to update my bio. I didn't put that in there, but yes, I was really excited about that.
So in life, it's not that we're participating; we're actually just competing and working to have that edge, or as I like to say, one leg up on on the competition. And even in writing, there's a bit of a competition, right?
Yes. And I have said too, like, the title of my book is My Unexpected Life. And you can kind of look at it two different ways. Yes, it's unexpected because things happen that I did not plan for. But it's also unexpected because people's expectations of somebody with a disability are low. So hopefully I'm
Yeah, I know. I mean, when I think of the
going
wheelchair basketball, I think of folks, the spectators are thinking, "Oh my God, it's amazing how they just got the shot in the basket." Meanwhile, the guys are like, "No, we want to win this game." You know what I mean? So it's a perspective thing, and obviously it hits on both. I see where you're going with that. With my unexpected life. But here's the chance to really help people understand that no, you can expect a lot from us, even if we're disabled. That's the whole point, isn't it?
correct. Yes.
And I just looking through your reel, you were also honored by the San Diego Central Library. Tell us about that.
Yes, that was great. Every year they do a local author showcase, and then they pick 12 books that become the author of the month each month. So I was chosen for April.
Congratulations. Now, let me ask you this. Do
Thank
you feel like when you're picked in these different things, in these different uh, big accomplishments, as long as you don't feel like you're filling a diversity quota, because sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes companies will do this to fill a diversity quota. But as long as they're not making
Yeah,
you feel that way, that's what matters, right?
correct. Yeah, no, I feel that. Because I I know my writing isn't just good because, again, going back to the low expectations, um, people people have, um, it's it's good because it's good, not because they think it should be bad because I'm disabled.
Part of me does this podcast, to be honest, Jennifer, because I feel like when I rollerblade on one leg around the city, that's kind of how I'm defined. But no, I've got thoughts and I've got a brain. That's why I feel very impassioned about the idea of being defined not by my, you know, whatever, but by my brain as well. Do you feel that as well? That you don't want to be defined by your disability, is what I'm getting at here.
Yes. Yeah. Big, big time. That's there's so much more to me. Disability is only a slice.
Oh, I love that line. That's a great line there, Jennifer. See, you're right, and you speak in poetry. There you go.
Well,
Uh,
thank you.
I've got to I've got to ask you this: in your journey, health wise, have you dealt with procedures? Have you dealt with constant medical appointments, or dare I say, ER visits? Like, how's the health aspect been of all
Oh
this?
gosh. Yeah, no, that's definitely been a challenge. In fact, 10 years ago, I was additionally diagnosed with MS. So I have both Friedrich's ataxia and MS. And because of that, I had to stop working full time. So, and part of that was the doctor's appointments pre-pandemic were overwhelming. They've gotten better since the pandemic, but for whatever reason, but yeah, it's very overwhelming. And it's also scary to go to an ER or go to urgent care because they're seeing you for one specific issue. They don't really understand the entire.
They don't get the, as they would call in the pandemic, the underlying conditions. And I wanted to ask you about the pandemic because I see that you turned maybe your frustration with the pandemic and having all that shut down into writing. In fact, you were published in Shaking the Tree, volumes 3 and 4, during the time of Corona. I mean, look, I feel like you also utilize writing as a way to express yourself. How was that form of expression during the pandemic? Was it different than, a normal year, if you will?
See, you have all these great questions. I I think the pandemic was definitely it gave me a platform, like something relevant to talk about now as it relates to disability. So in that sense, it definitely led me to talk more about it, but I was still in the middle of writing my book, and so it helped in some ways, and in some ways it didn't.
Well, you talk about people with disabilities and the pandemic. I got to ask you this: how were you feeling? I mean, here you are with both MS and Friedreich's ataxia, now having to deal with not catching COVID. A, did you get it at all, or B, what precaution did you take? Did you get out at least a little bit, mask up, or were you one that stayed in during the height of all this? What was your game plan, if you will?
Yeah, I did actually end up getting it. Gosh, I guess it's been 2 years already since I had it, and I was able to get Paxlovid. I forget what it's called.
Paxlovid, yeah, that was a big one.
I was able to get that, which was good. But really, like during the height of the thing, I masked and I didn't go anywhere. I'd go try and see my friends, but we would stay 6 feet apart.
That was smart. There you go. And I think of that as everybody was sort of affected in that way because we couldn't get the medical care we needed. We couldn't really even see our friends. But I'm glad that you were, you were saying, no, we're going to see people. We're not going to be indoors. That's good on you for that mentality because I think you just had to live in it, right? You had to just live and mask up and do what you could to do all that.
Exactly.
Where did you get your love of writing from? I mean, how old were you? Was this before you turned 17 that you were writing, and then the writing just turned differently because you became you were diagnosed with a disability. What tell us where the writing era started.
I'm not really completely sure. I know I dabbled in really bad poetry until I was about 16. And then my major started out to be communications, but then I ended up switching to English with writing, and that's really where it got made, really developed.
Well, this has been great, Jennifer, and I want to have you on now. This NIEA, is it over? Are you actually not only a finalist, but did you win? Like, when's that? When is the nomination?
Yes. The winner was announced. Yes. So I didn't win, but I got it.
Well, to be named a finalist is pretty badass, if I may say. So when you get these different nominations and these announcements as you've been a finalist, you're nominated. What's that like for you? Like what kind of feeling runs through your body?
It's really exciting because I just really I'm thankful for the recognition, but also that means my book has resonated with some other people.
Sorry, I'll fix that space up. No, and then a couple more things here because I'm looking again. And we touched on this earlier, but before you became disabled, what were your assumptions? Like I had to put you on the hot seat here, but I'm kind of curious about what assumptions you had to overcome as you were dealing with your own diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, well, part of Friedrich's ataxia was or is that it can cause an early death. And at the time I was diagnosed, what I read in a medical dictionary was 25. So that gave me 8 years. Later on, I found out that wasn't necessarily the case, but it was always kind of in the back of my mind.
But you don't strike me as the type that would go running around saying, "Oh my God, I have 8 years to live." I don't feel like you're the type of person to say that.
I didn't really, thankfully. And I think I did think my life was essentially going to be over and I'd have no social life. No one would want to date me. No one would want to be friends with me or I just felt I'd just be sitting at home all day. Those kinds of assumptions.
And then now you're immersed in the disability culture, and sometimes I like to focus on the society and culture. How can we talked about this earlier, but how can we be further inclusive in the culture? They've actually done the runway models, or now there's some disabled runway models, which is a great form of inclusivity. But from where you sit and stand, where can you see more inclusivity in the culture? Where would you like to see it?
Well, I think it's just really important to not believe the hype, if you will, or not believe everything you've seen or been told about disability. And remember, you're just dealing with a person. That's all you have to think about. And I'm not at all speaking for everyone, but I like to think most people with disabilities are open to questions, but not what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, I can definitely see where you're coming from. Like, if a kid came up to me and asked me about my crutches or my one leg, that's okay. But
Yeah,
if a grown adult awkwardly approaches, that really is not a trigger point, but it's bothersome, right?
yes. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't know any crazy things you've been asked or told that you could share with me tonight on the podcast, like any crazy questions you've been asked or anything you've been told, like, oh my God, what yeah, take it from there. What have you been told or asked that
Well,
sticks out in your mind?
God. Well, there was one time I can remember being in a grocery store, and I had a service dog at the time. And I heard a little boy ask his mom, "Why does she have that dog?" And the mom said, "Oh, she's blind." And I
Wow.
was like, yeah, no, not really. Like,
This is 1990 that this all started. In 2024, do you still find naivete, if you will, in the regular everyday life, like when you go out, or are people more inclined to just nod and smile instead of asking you stupid questions? Let me ask you that.
well, so my best friend is also a wheelchair user, and she and I will go hang out a lot, like go to restaurants and whatever. And uh, w several times we've been out and someone will comment to us, "Oh, it's so great to see you guys out."
That just sounds so passive aggressive or degrading, I guess.
Understanding. Yeah.
Can you are you able to have a nightlife? So full disclosure, I took my ex-girlfriend out to LA, and there really were nightlife spots where there weren't really even elevators. It just was stairs going upstairs, and she was in a power chair. Now, do you find that a challenge in the nightlife world, or do you go out at night like that? Like, what's your social scene like for you?
Well, I'm old now. I'm like 51. So, yeah, I don't go out too often. Although when I was and I moved here when I was 27. So, uh, so
So
I,
you were past kind of going out to that and that
yeah,
after hours type
I,
of thing.
I wasn't, yeah, that wasn't my scene. But I did go to a lot of concerts, and again, partly because it's California, they did whatever they could to make it accessible.
Oh, SoFi Stadium looks so beautiful. I'm sure it's very accessible as well. In that
Yeah,
downtown
yeah,
LA.
I know.
Uh,
I would like to go there, but yeah.
all right. One last thing for maybe my audience that doesn't understand what neuromuscular means. Just give us sort of in layman's terms, if you will, what that means for my listeners, so they can maybe understand a little more about what you've been going through since age 17 and what you've adapted to.
Yeah, so basically my brain doesn't really talk to any of my nerves very well. So it's kind of like they're rusty. And in addition to them not speaking that great, I don't produce an enzyme that lets you create muscle. So creating muscle is a difficult thing for me to do. It's possible, it just takes a long time.
I have to say, obviously, this must have affected the motor skills and the speech. And did you go to therapy early on, like OT, PT, and even speech? Like, what was that recovery process like through therapy?
Yeah, I did PT and it never really took. I didn't really see the point of it. And it got to the point too where whenever I did it, I felt worse. So I didn't want to keep doing it if it was just going to make me feel worse.
Understood. Well, this has been really insightful, Jennifer Gasner, and I'd love to have you back on as the writing continues. Do you have an actual? I know you have a website. Do you have a blog as well that we can follow?
Yeah, the blog is on my website, jennifergasner.com.
I'll put all those links, including the link to your book via Amazon on the description below. You know, SEO is everything today, so I'll make sure to get all the links out for you.
Yeah.
Jennifer, thanks so much, and we'll do this again soon.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thanks for joining the One Leg Up Network. I'm Alex Garrett. Talk to you soon.